Okay, welcome back everyone. My name is Krystal. I am the co-chair of the Mentorship Committee in Division 45, and I'm here today with Dr. Jackson and Stephanie, and we're going to be talking about applying for internship. So I'll have everybody introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about where you are in your journey and kind of how you found your way to psychology.
All right, good morning. I'm Dr. Jessica Jackson. I recently graduated in 2018 with my Ph.D. in counseling psychology from New Mexico State. This journey has been so long, I don't even know if I can remember how I found my way. But I think through just undergrad, I had an awesome professor in undergrad that led to switching my major. Then I got a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and then I got into counseling psychology. So I'm really excited to be able to give some pointers and tips today about internship. I'm currently a postdoc fellow at the Greater LA VA, so a large VA system, and I did my internship at UCLA CAPS. So have at this point been on both sides of interviews for internship and postdoc. I think I might be able to offer some insights for students as they're getting ready to get started, so I'm excited.
We're happy to have you.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is Samantha Martine, and I am a fourth-year doctoral candidate at the University of Laverne in Southern California. I came to psychology. I just feel like in high school, I just never really felt connected to the material I was learning until I took like an AP course and like an introductory course in psychology. I fell in love with it when I got my, was that you too? It was just, kind of like, it just gave me like, I was good. I was a good student, but just never really felt motivated. And then this psychology course just kind of like opened up my eyes to like a whole new world, you know? Right. And then went and got my bachelor's in psychology, and then I got my master's in mental health counseling. And then I worked a couple of years, and I was just kind of like, oh, I want to do more. And so the next step was just kind of like clinical psychology. And now we're here.
Awesome. Well, I was going to start out by kind of asking everybody to kind of discuss what their internship process was like. And Samantha, I know this is relatively fresh for you, yes. So I didn't know if you wanted to start out first, and then we'll have Dr. Jackson go. Okay.
Yes. So the internship process, I think for me, I tend to be, I'm a high stress person as it is. And so just kind of like hearing from other students about how the process was, I was stressed even before starting it. But I think somewhere along the line, I was talking to my mentor and just kind of like trying to tease apart where I was going to apply, just to kind of like help ground me. Right. I just decided that I'm just going to do my very best, and that once I do my essays, once I submit it, it's out of my control. And that mentality was so helpful for me, right? Because I was able to kind of like be semi-stress-free a little regarding that process. And so I was just able to kind of like, my goal was to kind of like apply to a bunch of VAs, because that's eventually where I see myself out. But there were a couple of non-VA sites that I was really interested in. And so I just kind of like went through the list. It was overwhelming at first, and I had a lot of people that I was able to reach out to. So a lot of people in my program who had gone through the process that kind of like extended their support out to me. And so I had a lot, I could not have made it without the support that I got, right? Whether it was my mentor or just kind of like upperclassmen who were just kind of like willing to kind of like take a quick look at my essays for me. And so I was just able to apply, and it was a stressful process applying and then waiting for interviews. That was somewhat stressful. And then I think that I did pretty well. And then just kind of like waiting for interviews and then going on the interviews for me is where I kind of like underestimated how stressful that would be. Traveling from the West Coast, a lot of my sites were on the East Coast. For me, that was one of the most stressful aspects of that. And so, yeah, I feel like there's so much I want to say, but my mind is all over.
It's okay. We'll break it down later. Okay. Overview, and we'll break it down. No problem.
Is my turn?
Yes.
I think internship, so I just want to preface it for those that are applying for internship. Postdoc, it's a lot better, okay? Because you'll have the experience, okay? Internship It is a lot because typically for me, I was still taking classes. So you're in the middle of your semester. Mm-hmm. So on top of your semester, still typically earning clinical hours, like still doing all the things and doing this really stressful thing. I found my program was super useful. So I encourage people to reach out to your mentors for like interviews and things like that, where they had us like do mock interviews. We were assigned a faculty member to kind of do reviews for essays. I reached out to a lot of listservs. A lot of the listservs have programs around internship, where they'll match you with a mentor to kind of review your essays, get all the feedback that you can. And I applied to a bunch of different sites because of my experience. So I applied to hospitals, VAs, and a few university counseling centers. And so then I had different, and I applied to like prisons because I worked in prisons. So I had different essays. So some of my essays, like the multicultural one, would stay the same, but it is very important, I think, to tailor your essay for the type of site that you're applying to, even in your language. Like in a hospital, they're going to use words like patients. At a counseling center, they're going to use words like clients. So just being aware as you're doing your essay, because that demonstrates your fit. And it may be that you're a fit for all these different type of sites, but they're not going to get that from one generic cover letter or one generic essay. Even the case that I chose to use for the essay that's asking about like our theory and things like that differed depending on the type of site that I was applying for. So I found that getting a lot of support for that up front actually made it easier for me when I was applying, when I was doing interviews, because at that point I had to kind of justify my essays to so many different people and like getting feedback, that it was easy to just kind of speak from who I was and integrate the work that I was doing. I do think the travel is stressful. Having an Excel spreadsheet, somebody above me, a cohort above me, had shared with me their spreadsheet, and that was super helpful. Of the sites that you applied to, and keeping track of like the notification date. You can often find out when they had interviews at the last time, because it's helpful when you're planning. When you get an interview, being able to keep track of it, so you can keep track of your flights and keep track of other things, because the interview invites come fast and furious typically. So it'll be email, phone, like they reach out to you in all these different ways, and you trying to keep track of it as you schedule. I think at one point I had forgotten to cancel a flight and was somewhere else and got a notification of a flight. And I was like, what is this for? Like trying to figure it out. You get thank goodness it was on Southwest. Southwest is your best friend because there are no cancel fees.
I agree.
Not that I'm like supporting them, but they're the best flight, the best one if you're going to have to fly, because you can cancel your flight, you can move flights around, and there's no extra fee for that. And that was a lifesaver for me. So I think it is a stressful experience, but there are a lot of things you can do to help reduce some of that.
Right. And I'm glad to kind of have a conversation about that. Like, you always hear it's so stressful, everything just comes at you at once, but the prior planning before, right, in order to kind of keep yourself organized and kind of help reduce stress as much as you can is very important.
Yes.
I know in my program, sometimes we don't talk as much about what the actual application process is like. So actually applying the various essays, how to tailor those. So I found that very helpful, just kind of discussing that. So maybe beginning with, how many programs would you suggest someone apply for, and how do you tailor those sites to what you're really interested in, where you're interested in working in the future?
So for my program, we had to do a minimum of 15. And so I did the minimum of 15. And so a lot of people in my cohort actually did what I consider to be way more than that. But I was looking at the research suggests that anything above 12 or 11, 10 to 12 is just kind of like an excess. And so in understanding that all the programs I'm applying to, I am responsible for the cost, was also a determining factor of how many programs I apply to. And so just considering that, okay, I have to do at least 15. So I definitely want to do that to meet my program's requirement, but also wanting to do one or two more. My anxiety was just kind of telling me, do a little bit more. And so I did that, but also my factors was the cost, because I'm I have to pay to apply to it. And I also, if I'm granted an interview, I'll have to pay for the costs associated with that. So that's traveling, hotels. And then again, I'm coming from the West Coast, and a lot of my sites were on the East Coast. So considering like, okay, what is the traveling going to look like for me if I have to go to an interview? And so that really helped me to tailor down how many places I applied to. But as far as like with the essays was concerned, like Dr. Jackson was saying, like it was I did the same thing, which is kind of like, I went through the brochures and just kind of like made sure that I tailored my essays to the individual sites. And so sometimes if it was a VA that had something that was very distinctive from another VA, I made sure to kind of like include that in my essays, because I really wanted to ensure that I was really responding to the essay in a way that they could really get a feel of who I was and what I was looking for. I really wanted to ensure that my essay was like a really great representation of who I was, because that's the first thing they're going to see. And so I made sure that all my essays were really tailored, and I got a lot of feedback on my essays, and I think that really helped me. And I also think that doing it that way for me helped reduce my anxiety. I think that having multiple eyes on it and me doing multiple revisions really helped me. When I finally hit send or submit, I felt calm, I felt at ease, which was different. It's different for me. So, and I just credit that to just feeling like I felt prepared. I felt like I did my best because I had so many people look at my essays and provide me feedback. And like Dr. Jackson was saying earlier, like when I got to my interviews, I just felt like, normally I'm nervous at interviews, but for the most part, I was just like, hey, I've already gone through this. I've already gotten feedback. So I'm kind of like, I felt pretty calm at the interview, which is also rare for me, but I felt pretty prepared.
Yeah.
I think when I applied for, I think, 18 sites total.
Okay.
For me, I think what's really important is not so much the number. I think what happens is people get really nervous. And so then they kind of apply out of that nervousness of like, I don't know if I'm going to get any more, because what happens during the internship process is when you're starting, you have your list of sites, and typically in that November, even up to like early November, sites who got funding will add and get added. So there's sites that you hadn't been thinking of. And so then sometimes people are like, I haven't heard back for interviews. Let me apply to these other sites. And I think it's also something to keep in mind. So some of my extra sites where I got to the 18 were sites I was genuinely interested in that did not get funding until, or could not confirm their funding until like November, December. And so they ended up being added to my list because they weren't available before that. Off new sites, so sites that just got accreditation typically are not going to post when the APPCAS opens up, because if they don't have their interview for accreditation until like October, they're not going to know until like November, December that they're accredited to be able to post. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And that changes. So even sites that have posted, their accreditation might change. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want an APA accredited site. Now they are. I might want to add them where you might not have considered them before.
Right.
So I think that's always something to consider that can kind of drive your numbers up. Or people will get open positions. So there'll be a lot of sites on there that already are advertising. And let's say like, I was interested in primary care mental health. Maybe they got additional funding and now they can have another internship slot for PC-MHI or another slot for health psych or something like that. And so then you're like, oh, now I want to add them. So I think keeping in mind that all the sites are not posted when it starts. That's not the need. And I think for me, what was most important was finding sites. Because depending on your state, it might be your last training. Not all states require postdocs. And so it's really your last like supervised training opportunity. And so for me, it was about finding sites I thought were a good fit that would help me to elevate what I could already do and teach me something new. And so because I'd had varied clinical experience, that's why I applied to different types of sites and really looked for like, what could they offer? Because you're not really a good fit for a site where you can do everything that they're offering and they're going to feel the same way. It's like, how are you going to grow here? Because everything listed, you already do.
Right.
So you do want to look for sites that are going to help you. This is, I think sometimes we don't talk enough about for internship, that the goal is not to totally demonstrate all you can do. Like you're not being evaluated on how awesome you are per se. It's like also where else can you learn? So if you are 100% fit with a site, because you do all the things, they're going to ask you in their interview, like, what are you going to be able to get from here? What are you going to learn from here? That makes you not a good fit because it feels like for them, they don't have anything to offer you. So I think when you're looking at the type of sites to apply, to really think through, what am I wanting to learn? And starting to think about your career. What am I wanting to go into? Maybe I have a ton of experience with older adults and I want to do some younger adult work. So you're going to want to find a site that also serves younger adults and the older adults. So I could build on that, you know. I don't advise something like I've only done pediatric work and then I want to work with geriatrics, because that's really going to be a hard sell, because they're going to be like, you don't have any experience with this. You're going to have some experience, I think.
Right.
So I think that is a really key thing in determining your number. As Samantha mentioned, there is a lot of literature about over a certain number, it doesn't really add to your chances. So that is something to consider. But also I think that you don't need to be practical about it all the time. I have a lot of like what I consider shoot your shot sites that I'm like, I'm barely making the minimum, but I'm really interested. Because you don't know how internship works out, where you're a good fit. And those were sites I got interviews at, and sites where I thought I was a sure shoo-in, I didn't get interviewed.
Right.
Super glad I applied to these like reaching for the stars sites. And I think it's okay to have a balance of those sites. So if you're applying like 15 sites, have 5 on there that are really like, I don't really know, but I'm still going to try, because you never know how you might fit, especially because we're Division 45, looking at multicultural aspects. A lot of sites are looking for that. And if you have something to offer in that training, they're going to be interested in that. So you might think that a site is like elite or above where you may be, but they may be looking for exactly what you're offering. It's kind of like grad school. They're looking for a fit with their cohort and what they have in mind. So I think that should kind of factor into the number of sites you're applying, being really thoughtful about what you want to get from it and where you're looking for your future.
Right, right. And so far this has been really helpful for me, because I'm a third year, but I plan on extending my time. So I haven't even gotten to the internship process yet. So I'm like, oh my gosh, let me take notes, but I'll just save the recording and probably contact you both. But right, when I'm thinking about where I choose for practicum sites, I'm always thinking, well, maybe I should try to diversify the population that I'm with so that I can be a fit for a lot of different places, but then also I want to keep that root that's strong, right? So I do like primary mental health integration. I've had sites there, but mostly I've been doing assessments in neuropsych. So it's like trying to find that balance, right? And that I know hospital settings are really my goal, but where, I haven't figured that out. So it was really good to kind of hear that, like, maybe you're a fit because you've done X, Y, and Z, but you haven't done the other thing yet. And that would be a good argument.
Right. And I think you bring up a good point. I think there's nothing wrong also when you're the year before you're applying, looking at not like a deep dive, you know, going into it, but kind of looking at some of the sites. Just on the Applecast, you can at any point log in to the sites and looking at the minimum, because that might help you to tailor to programs you're trying to apply for, because there's nothing worse than getting ready to apply and realizing you're only like 25 hours short of assessment hours for a site that you wanted or something. Right. And you could have been planning for that. So I think that it's helpful. That's one of the things that I did. One of my faculty members was like, hey, this is a good idea, you know, do this. That was useful. And like, I kind of had an idea of some of the minimums I needed to apply to some of the sites I was interested in. So I could make sure that I tailored those hours in that last 6 months or last year, so that I would at least have what I needed to apply to sites I was really interested in. Because when you're racking up your hours and counting your hours, you're not always aware, and sites are very specific, and like you need to have this many assessment out, and they'll have a minimum, and sites really, that's how they kind of help themselves kind of take out of the running.
Out the initial.
It's like you can be 1 hour, you don't meet the minimum. That's their filter, because that's what they advertise is. And that is a really good way for them to take out people. So even when people are like, oh, I have close, but not enough, you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Right.
I totally agree. I remember so my third year in my program, for one of my courses, we had an assignment where we had to present on 3 possible internship sites that we might want to apply to. And so initially I was just kind of like, oh, this is just yet another assignment. But then like I was able to really like get into the assignment. And so I went on APIC and I kind of like browsed through some of the sites that I think I would be interested in. So at that time it was VAs and community mental health centers, right? I kind of like browsed through a couple of VAs, browsed through a couple of community mental health centers. And I noticed that a lot of the VAs, at least for me, they had like a minimum of like 150 assessment, 100 to 150 assessment hours. And at that time, I had 50. So
wow.
I said to myself, okay, if this is what I really want to pursue, then I won't have the minimum that they're looking for. So I ensure that my next practicum site, that this is the experience that I need to get. So I think that assignment really helped me in planning for, to ensure that I was meeting the minimum requirements. Because I remember one VA I applied to, like the very first thing they told us when we all or during the interview, we all gathered in the room. And then the training director said, hi, you all are here because you all met the minimum requirement. Anyone who did not meet the minimum requirement did not make it. And then hearing her say that, I felt really good. I was just kind of like, yes, I actually met the minimum requirement, right? And it all happened because the year prior, I was able to really do an inventory of where I was and what I needed to do to ensure that minimally that I had met these requirements that some of these sites were asking for. And so I encourage you, like, if you still have another practicum experience to do, like really do an assessment of where you're at and then proceed from there, just to ensure that you are meeting those requirements, to ensure that at the very least, like you get an interview at those sites that you're interested in.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. I'm taking the advice, trust me. So we've kind of talked about this in and out so far, the conversation, the cost. How was that and how do you plan for that?
I don't know that you can plan for it.
Okay, can't plan for it.
I think, one of the things that I notice a lot of sites are moving to, and being mindful of that, is, for the social justice aspect, there are a lot of sites moving to video only or telephone only, like they don't even offer it in person to make it fair for students that cannot come. Right. And they will indicate that in the APIC system, like the type of interview, and I think that is important. Some sites will offer options, and I think there are some places where it's up to you. I think sites that are really high on your list, you really want to make sure you go and visit the ones that you're really, really interested in. I think ones that you're interested in, but you are not your priority, you might be able to fit in like a video. It's still, I think, important to see. I think as someone who did phone interviews, there were some sites that had that really good phone interviews. It is really difficult to get a feel or sense of the people, the culture, the environment over the phone. I do and there are some sites that do it where they do the interviews one way and then they have one open house where people can come, everybody comes on that day to kind of get a tour, to kind of see what it's like. So there's different ways to do that. I think being realistic with yourself and saving money, being able to plan ahead, making sure you sign up for like points. So any trips that you're taking before that you get those points because they're really useful. I think when you're starting to look at even having to do things like car rentals, like looking for student discounts, I think through APA, as a member, you get discounts on like certain car rentals, and like really being knowledgeable about what perks that you get and using them is super helpful. Figuring out places that you can stay. There are some listservs and forums that set up things so that people can partner together. Like when they're going on interviews, people can kind of connect with each other. Because it really, I don't think is a way to plan for the cost per se, because it's going to happen last minute. You're not going to know if you got an interview and you're going to have like 3 weeks or a month, even at most a month to get there. So, and you don't know until you hear from them. So it's hard to plan for a trip that you don't know you're going on.
Yeah.
So I think just starting to think about how can I use points. If family members have points, they want to donate to you, and like starting to talk to people ahead of time. All of that I think is helpful.
Right.
I definitely agree with Dr. Jackson. It was hard to plan because I know for me, what I try to do is I try to have my interviews. So a lot of my interviews were like on the East Coast and like a lot of the Southeast, right? And so I tried to like plan out my interviews. Let's say if I had something in Atlanta, then I try to plan Atlanta, or maybe like Chicago, or maybe like Alabama. Then I try to plan them all around the same time. And it did not work for me, if I'm being honest. I found myself like just flying all over the place. But then again, I don't think I did a really good job at planning. But then again, I'm like, I don't even know if I could have done a better job at planning, just because my interviews all came at different times. And I tried my very best to kind of like reduce my cost. So I would reach out to, I interviewed in Atlanta, so I reached out to my cousin. Hi, can I stay with you? Can you pick me up from the airport? And he did that. And I had interviews in Florida. So I'm from Florida, so I stayed at home. I try to rely on my resources depending on what state that I was interviewing at. But there are times where I just had no other choice but to get like a hotel room and a rental. And so what I try to do is I try to like see if it's worth it to get a rental, or is it better to just Uber to the place that I need to get to, depending on how far it is. I did find that in one particular location, like it was easier for me to get a rental than Uber because it was more expensive. And so I did that. And I would just ask them, do you offer a student discount, right? Do you offer some kind of discount just to kind of like help me reduce the cost? But I don't know if there's a way you could really plan for it. I really don't know if there's a way you can plan for it.
I think one thing also is don't be afraid to ask a site for a different interview day. The worst that they can say is no, but sites also recognize that this is a tough time. And so I had to do that at one point. I'm like, I'm already going to be in the city for this interview. Is there any way that I can come for an interview at this other time? And sometimes they're like, oh, we can't interview you, but if you'd like to come and at least see it and look around and then do like a phone interview or video interview. I'm like, for me, that was fine too, because I want to be able to see the site. And thinking about how you're flying in and out of airports. There were days where I flew in for the interview and left out the same day so that I could get to the next site. That way I didn't have to do 2 hotel rooms. So I'm like, I'm just going out. And I think for a stretch of time, probably almost 2 weeks, I did not fly back into my home airport because it was cheaper to fly from site to site to site rather than going in and out. I was flying in and out of Maryland at the time. It was cheaper to just go from one place to the next than trying to get back and then go back out again. And a lot of it, I just asked sites so that I could try to make some schedule. And sometimes they're open to it. They're like, okay, you're already going to be here. Granted, it makes sense. If they're not able to accommodate you, they'll let you know, but it doesn't hurt to ask. You don't know until you ask.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I've heard stories of students saying that they like slept in the airport the night so they can make the other flight. And I'm like, I don't know if the life for me, but I understand it, right? Like I understand you got to do what you got to do to get there.
And be aware of, I hope one day we move this time period. You're going on internship interviews in the middle of the winter. Depending on where we were going, I applied to sites East Coast, West Coast, and in the South. And I definitely got stuck in a snowstorm. I had one site where they cut our interview early because there was a snowstorm coming, and they were trying to get they were like, we know that y'all can't get stuck here. And it was in Atlanta. And unfortunately, all the people I interviewed with that day, our flights were canceled. So all of us that were going somewhere else, we were then you're in the airport trying to reschedule everything and you're and I think when you don't at least have that in the back of your mind, keeping an eye on the weather, even asking people, like if you see that there's something coming up, asking them, hey, is there a contingency plan if you're not able to meet? Because you are applying in the middle of the winter. There's no way to control the weather and flight, that stuff. So even if you plan the best that you can, it's going to get messed up.
Right. Yeah. That's a very good point. Okay, so actual interview day, how was that for both of you?
My experience with interview day is, I remember feeling I think for the first few interviews I felt very nervous. I was just like really concerned about impression management, just kind of like, Samantha, make sure you don't say the wrong thing. Like I was really concerned about how I presented to the group or whoever was interviewing me, just really making sure that I was, quote, perfect, right? And I think that added a lot of anxiety for me, a lot of pressure, a lot of undue and unnecessary anxiety. But I think that once I was able to break out of that, quote, perfectionistic mode that I thought I had to be in, I found that I felt a lot more comfortable. I think for me, interview day, again, like, which is not like me, like it really wasn't as stressful as I thought it was going to be. But then again, I went in thinking that I was going to be at a 10. And so when I got there, it really wasn't. Interview days for me went pretty smooth. The only thing that I remember that really was kind of like an inconvenience for me was the weather, because I interviewed in places where it snowed or it would rain the morning of. And so just making sure that I get there on, or even traffic, right? I remember in Atlanta, traffic.
Oh gosh, Atlanta.
And like I shouldn't have been surprised because I live in LA, but for whatever reason, I was just freaking out in the car, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be late. And so for me, like interview days was about like making sure I arrived on time, and also making sure that I just making sure that I was present and that I was able to really present myself in a way that I felt was most representative of who I was and what I was looking for. So authenticity for interview days was important for me. And so those were just kind of like the things that I was grappling with on interview days. But other than that, like I showed up and was able to learn about the place, was hopefully able to teach them about myself. And it was actually, it wasn't as stressful as I anticipated interview day to be in my experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think to a degree, I actually think it's a little fun. There were some people that I interviewed on literally across coast that we were at the same interviews. And so by the end, we were friends. On the last interview, it was somebody I interviewed with in LA, and then I interviewed with them somewhere else. And at the last interview we had, which is in DC, we're like, we're going to lunch to celebrate. Like, you know, and so I think you're getting to meet a lot of people in the field. I think having been on both sides, I think what Samantha is saying is being authentic. Sites really look at that. Like, we just did postdoc interviews at my site, and on my internship, we got to sit through internship interviews. And at both sites, the thing is people are looking to see who you are. And so if you just kind of memorized your responses, that comes across. And at the end, if people are like, I still don't know who they are, like not coming to their answers, that's the point of an interview, is for people to get to know who you are. Like, to a degree, they're going to expect that you already know certain things because you got this far. They're going to expect that you know how to do therapy. They're going to expect that you know how to do some assessments and interventions. Like, because you got this far, your hours will not suggest that. What they're really looking for is, who are you? And so how does that come through in the work that you're doing? So you kind of quoting verbatim from one of your essays about your thoughts on a case, we already read that. We know that. We want to know who you are. Give us something different. So the advice I give to people for the interviews is like, don't give us the same thing you gave in your essays. We're looking for something different. We already read your application. That's why you're here. Right. I think for me, you know, I used to joke on internship. I matched at UCLA. That was my number one choice. I had the worst interview there. What I felt on my end. So it was only after I matched there and started that when they gave me their perspective, they thought it was an amazing interview. And for me, I thought it was like one of those interviews where I was like flying out right after. I just felt like all over the place. The weather wasn't good. And I think I made a mistake in answering one of the questions. And then in my mind, I was like, this is over. Like, and so I just felt like I relaxed a lot more. Like, you already messed this up. But it allowed them to see a lot more of me. And so they felt on the opposite end that it was an awesome interview. But I remember leaving and talking to a friend of mine who's also on internship interviews. I was like, girl, it was terrible. Like, I was like super laid back, like super, not feeling like I was giving concise answers. And so it just goes to show, like, when we think we're doing a really good job, we actually may not be showing who we are, and that's not what sites are looking for. And so how you're feeling doesn't necessarily equate to what they're seeing, if that makes sense. So even sometimes we do a really good interview, you might have gotten feedback later that was like, actually, we didn't think that was all that great. We didn't. I really encourage people to be mindful of just using the language, especially for multicultural language. When you go into an interview, I have absolutely sat in on interviews where people are using the language and it's not even in the appropriate context. And I'm like, you're just kind of highlighting the words because you think that's what you should do. People notice that. If it doesn't apply, like, we're not asking you to show us everything you know in this little bit of interview. So if it doesn't apply, don't use it. It's like when you use a big word that doesn't quite fit and everybody's like, why aren't you this a better way? People are paying attention to that. So you might feel better, maybe a little smarter when you do it, but it didn't fit. Right. So when people are doing interviews, those are things that are stressful. Like Samantha said, the impression management, I think being mindful of that. And I think also packing snacks, water. There were some interviews I had that were all day interviews. Other interviews I had that were only like an hour. So you don't really know what a site is going to do. Sometimes at some sites I would send ahead of time. Here are the questions we're going to answer. Here's your agenda. Boom. At some sites I didn't hear anything from them until I showed up. So I had no idea like what to expect. So keep snacks and water and like stuff in your bag to help you to get through the day, a comfortable pair of shoes. If you decide to wear heels, more than likely you're getting a tour at some point. It is fine to put on some walking shoes or something like that, as long as they're like still like professional shoes, but keep like having basically a bag that's like I got everything I need in this bag, because you have no idea what the day is going to bring.
Right, right. And I'm wondering if, as persons of color, did you feel any added stress, pressure during interviews or anything like that?
I think for me, like as a Black woman, I always feel added pressure to work twice as much or twice as hard. And so that's always with me. But I think that once I was able to make it to those interviews, and it's funny that you asked that, because there were interviews I was at and I was the only only person of color in the whole room. Right. That's including the staff that was there and also like the trainees, right? So the only one, the applicant. And so it was just kind of like, so that in itself felt a lot of pressure. But I think for me, like when I had those situations, I was able to kind of like really sit back in my seat. And I really felt a sense of like, wait, I worked my butt off to be here. So it was kind of like, yes, I'm here, I worked my butt off. And yes, I might be the only person of color, but I deserve to be here just as much as anyone else does. And when I got into that mindset and I started my own affirmations in my head, when I started like cheering myself up and became my own little cheerleader, I felt that I didn't have as much pressure as when I initially walked in and I noticed that I was the only person of color. But I will say that as a Black woman, when I was writing my essays, I felt some pressure. I felt like where do I start? What do I say? Like, do I self-identify? Like, will this harm me if I talk about my background in that way? Like, so I felt those pressures initially, but then I think that it was just all me. I feel like I added a lot of undue pressure to myself, because at the end of the day, when I was able to get through it and as I've been able to reflect back, I realized that a lot of the anxiety I felt, I brought it on myself, right? And so, I would say that was my experience, like a lot of anxiety initially, but once I was able to start with my affirmations, I was just kind of like, I owned it, like, this is the reality of it is, and just do what you always do and do your best. And that really helped me to really focus and really not allow that to kind of like deter me.
I think I had a slightly different experience. I think by the time I was going to internship, I was like, I know the type of people I want to work with. I know what I want to do. In my program, I didn't have any Black supervisors. That was important to me. I was like, I want to be supervised clinically by somebody that's Black.
Right.
Get some of the other experiences that I have, who recognizes, I mean, as people of color, APIC produces their statistics every year. There's not a whole lot of us going into psychology every year that are matching and getting through the process. And so for me, I went into my essays being super pro cross-cultural diversity, like in all of my essays. Because I'm like, if people are not open to this, it's not a site I want to be at.
Right.
Because that's very important to me. I think through some of my feedback from some of my essays, I think I still acknowledged it in every essay, but I toned it down to a degree. But I talked about, I weave diversity all through it, because I'm like, this is important to me.
Right.
And I had to be okay with sites that weren't going to be okay with that. And there are going to be sites that maybe that took me out of the running. Right. And so I think then when I went to my interviews, for me, it was also like, I was very clear about who I am in my essays. So when I come into this interview, you're not only interviewing me, I'm interviewing you because I get to rank too. And I think that was very helpful for me, that mentality, and going into my interviews. It's like, I'm taking note of stuff too. I'm taking note of when I'm the only in a room, because that's what I want to do for a year, right? Right. Taking note of how many people don't talk about diversity aspects that I'm interested in when they're talking about their patients throughout my interview, because that is what I'm interested in. And I think having that mindset was helpful to me. Like, I'm getting interviewed and I am interviewing, right? Because ultimately I'm going to rank. And just because a site really likes me does not mean that I felt like it's a great match for me. And I think that helped with some of, I think, the pressure. I was just feeling like I belong. I think there's some validation. Sometimes people get caught up in like what school they went to and what they're doing. And when you're in a room for internship with all these people from different places, it's like, you're here. I promise you, sites are not doing you a favor. They're not like, oh, I feel bad for you, let me bring you here. If you are in the room, it is because they think that you're qualified and that you belong there. And so I think remembering that when you come for an interview, it's like they felt like you belong here, you belong. I think that can help with some of like the nervousness, feeling like some of the pressure. So I think by the time I got to internship, I was just like, I know what I'm looking for and what's important to me. And that helped. And by the time you get through your interviews, after like the 5th time of repeating yourself, there is no nervousness. By the time you get to the end, after a while, the interviews start to feel the same. You have the same answers. You're like, I already know how to respond to this. You kind of get to the end. By the last one, you're like, yeah, can we just, let's move this along. Like,
let's go for the tour now.
So you don't feel like the nervousness. After you do like 1 or 2, I think you get a feel for it. After that, it's just like business as usual. Like if you're teaching a class, I already know what's next.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thank very much for that, because I personally have experienced that only in the room, especially in like neuropsychology. It's like you're the only, period, in a lot of the settings. So I think like coming through with that identity, like I'm here because I'm qualified and I'm here because I'm qualified too, is very helpful for sure.
If I can add something to what Dr. Jackson was saying. So initially with my essays, I struggled. And then I think after talking to different people, I just decided that I was just this is me, right? You're either going to, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, right? Both professionally and personally. So just deciding that this is how I want to tailor my essays. And diversity and multicultural issues are so important to me. Like when it came down to me kind of like ranking, I ranked based on training and how much they emphasize or how important diversity and cultural factors was important to the individual sites. And so throughout my essays, I incorporated some kind of diversity aspects, some kind of multicultural aspects. And what I did at all of my interviews, it's funny because like it seemed like a pattern where out of all of my interviews, especially the ones where I was the only, I was the one asking all the multicultural issues, right? And so something that I look for, a lot of sites would say to me, oh, well, multiculturalism is embedded throughout. And then I would follow it up with, can you give me an example? How would that look like? And then people would start struggling like, oh, well, I heard that, and I would process after each interview. I would speak to my mentor and I would call my best friend. I would be like, girl, this is what I heard. That's really, it's not important for them, right?
Right.
I would make note of how I was feeling as they were responding to my questions, just kind of like, and sometimes my notes would be like a smiley face or a sad face or just kind of like a quick little process note so that I know when I go back when it's time for ranking, I know how I felt when they responded to some of my questions, because a lot of my sites were the same. And so it wasn't a matter of training. It was more so how important is diversity for you? And so how convinced am I in your response and you creating this one and this very important salient aspect of me personally and professionally. So I did make note of that. And for sites that, I felt like were not going to, because I was really looking for diversity. So for sites that I felt that I would have been their diversity, like this would have been it, I didn't end up ranking them high at all because I did not. I've been an only, right, throughout my training. So I was really looking for a site in which I don't want to be an only. I think that part of my racial socialization was to take pride in being an only. And for a while, it was a source of pride. But after you're an only for so many years, you're just like, look, like I want friends. I want to be relationships. I don't want this anymore. And so for me, looking for my training, that was a very important aspect of it. But I won't lie, I did grapple with, okay, I could be an only, and maybe I'm the only one that these patients will see, right? So on one hand, I wanted to say, well, maybe if I'm here, then that means that people who look like me will have someone who look like them that they can come to for help. But also to another side of me was just kind of like, look, like I understand they need help, but my heart isn't there, right? And so just kind of like, I don't want to be an only. I want to be in a place that is diverse, that I feel like is just reflects who I am as a person. And so, yeah, I just grappled with those two thoughts at a lot of sites I went to, because unfortunately I was the only person in the room.
I can get that. We've kind of mentioned it. So ranking, how does that work? How was the process?
I think Samantha touched on it a little bit. Very important to take notes, even if you do it after the interview, because you're going to do so many interviews, so many different places. By the end, they're going to feel jumbled.
Right.
Like, oh, where was the place that said this, or who said that they had that? Like, you're just exhausted. It is a very emotionally, physically exhausting process, the whole process. So I think for me, whether you take notes throughout the interview, or I used to just jot things down in my phone, like email them to myself afterward when I was on the plane or like in the Uber, whatever thoughts I had of the site, so that when it came to ranking, I could remember. Because kind of like that hindsight bias sometimes, like you're going to be like, oh, sites that you interviewed at first, you might end up thinking more highly of because you can't quite remember your experience.
Right.
Yeah.
At some places in December and some places at the end of January, and in between then it's like, I don't know, but I guess it went okay. I don't have anything that sticks out.
Right.
So I think it's important, and I think it's also important when you're ranking to really think about all of the things. Was it a good fit? Is it a good location? Because I think the total ranking ends up being pretty easy. Right. The ones in the middle are where you get stuck at. So like the ones you're going to rank high, typically you already know. You're like, I love this place, I want to be here. The ones that you're going to rank low or not rank, which is totally fine to rank, not rank places. Those are easy. You're like, oh, I know I don't want to be here, or I would only be here if this thing happened. Which, by the way, I encourage people, if you actually can't see yourself there, don't rank them just for the sake of wanting to rank, because you could actually end up there and then you're going to be really sad. So if you're like, I really, really don't like this place, don't rank it. It's okay. But the ones in the middle where you're going to get stuck the most. What side am I ranking 5 versus 6? What side am I ranking 4 versus 5? Like those are the ones you're like, what gives what an edge? And so thinking about what's really important to you.
See, I struggled to rank everything. I mean, the sites that I knew I could not see myself at, that was easy. Like, okay, I'm just not going to worry about it because I just cannot see myself here. But I struggled with ranking like my 1 or my 2 and even like my 3 and my 4, just because like in my head, I thought that my interview went really well. And so I just struggled because I knew that I was like, well, if I rank this one and I actually get it, then what about the one I'm ranking 2? I made the process a lot more difficult than it had to be, if I'm being honest, because I don't know, what else am I going to do, right? I'm going to stress over it. But what I did is I think at one of my earlier interviews, we got the feedback of like jotting down process notes of how you were feeling, not necessarily what they were saying or not necessarily what was going on, but just how you felt when whatever was being said was said. And so for all of my interviews, I started jotting down quick little process notes. And then, and as Dr. Jackson mentioned, sometimes like in my Uber or on the plane, if there was something else I wanted to jot down, then I would just kind of like write this like 2-3 sentence, whatever it was. But I always made sure to process how I was feeling. So at the end of it all, I went back through all of my notes and just kind of like looked at my smiley faces or my sad faces or whatever face I wrote down, and just to kind of like help me rank. I really struggled with my 1 and my 2 just because they were just really both great sides. And then I started catastrophizing about, well, what is this? Look, I just made it way harder than it had to be. But for me, like trying to tease apart which one I wanted over another, which at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because both of them are really great sites and I could really see myself at both sides. And that's something that was very important to me that Dr. Jackson had mentioned. Can you see yourself at this site? Yes, it's only a year, and yes, you could do pretty much, you could be anywhere within that year, but will you really be happy? Because it's going to be, what we were told is that, hey, internship can be stressful. If you're not done with dissertation, you're probably still working on it, and then you're probably going to be away from your home, depending on where you're at. So try to reduce your stress as much as possible. Like there were some sites that were like in rural parts of the country. I could not see myself there whatsoever. So I was just like, I'd rather not rank than be there. Like for me, like I thought that was fair. Like I would be miserable there. And so there were sites that I did not rank because I could really not, I don't want to be there. And so I struggled with that. Like, would I rather not rank, or would I rather go to a place that I'm miserable for a year, but hey, it's only a year, right? I grappled with those two thoughts. And so ultimately, I think it all depends on the individual and where they would be, where they think is the best fit for them. And then like, I really just like ranked with my heart, honestly. I I don't think I was, I just ranked with my heart. Like where did I feel the most happy? Where did I feel like I could grow the most? And where did I feel like I was actually bringing something to the table, right? I think it's like a two-way street. Like, what are you bringing to the site, and what is the site giving to you? And so I rank based on location, and also where can I really see myself?
And I think it's important to consider it's okay, whatever is important to you, because everybody's different. If location is important to you, that is okay. I think sometimes we get into this mindset of like, where am I getting the best this or the best that? This is a point in your life where you can finally start to prioritize some things. If you have a partner and it's really important to you to be close to your partner, then that is a part of how you're ranking sites. If it is really important for you to be somewhere that has a certain type of mentor, that is okay, that is how you're choosing your sites. Like, you have to know what you're valuing currently to be able to do it. I think the worst way that you can rank is, where do I think I'm going to get in at? Because you don't have an idea. And so sometimes people are like trying to be realistic, and they're like, I think this is like, you don't actually know. So you really need to put on what you like and not where you think you did the best at or where you think you had the best, because you don't know if you had the best interview there. And I think sometimes people try to do that like as a way of like, feeling like they're cheating the system. Like, I really like site A, but I felt like site B was friendlier to me, so they must really like me more, so I'm going to rank site B higher. And that's not actually the place you want to be. But you feel like, I was where I'm at, so I'm going to rank them higher. You don't know. So really being okay with what your values are and ranking based on that, and not where you think you could be or where you kind of could end up, I think is super important.
Right. No, I'm learning a lot again. I'm just thinking about everything I've heard about, like, you know, this roller coaster journey that is the internship process. And then it all ends with match day, we think anyway, right? So what was match day like?
For me, I'm on the West Coast, so I knew that I was told we would get an email between like 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I already told myself, well, you're not going to sleep because you're going to be up waiting. And again, I'm just an anxious person naturally. And so I think I did fall asleep, and then I got up maybe like I got up at 4:30. And I kept refreshing. So 4:30 my time. And kept refreshing, and no email was coming through. And I told myself, Samantha, you're being silly. Just go to bed, wake up at 5, and then, because then 5 o'clock will be 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and then you should have an email. Of course, I went to bed. I set an alarm, and I slept for maybe 5 minutes, and I got up, and I kept refreshing my browser. And then, I don't know, I sent a text out to a couple of classmates, and then, I don't know, and then finally I get this notification at like 4:53, and I'm super excited. And in the subject, it doesn't tell you where you match. It just says like match results, and so you don't know what the results are.
Oh, God.
You don't know. So my heart is beating, even though I was really confident that I was going to match at my top site. So, but my heart is beating nonetheless, and I hurry up and I open the email and I read, and you have to scroll all the way down, and the place where your match is at the body of the email. So I'm like, okay, where is it? And then finally I see that I matched at my top site. So I was really excited that morning, and I don't know, I was just so filled with excitement that I just stayed up like that whole day. It was really exciting. I felt, it was just kind of like, I felt a sense of pride. I felt accomplished, just kind of like, wow, like I'm actually doing this. Like I actually placed, right? I actually matched, even though like I was pretty confident that I was, but to actually get the confirmation, it was just kind of like, wow, like this is really happening. Like this is really happening.
I'm going to be a psychologist.
Yes, like this is like one milestone. So like the next thing really is dissertation, and then like I'm going to actually be a psychologist. And so for me, it was kind of like, I don't know, I felt everything all at once, and I just don't know how to describe it, but it felt really good. Like it was just kind of like, yes, I'm really excited, and that was my experience.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is so exciting, because I know it's recent for you, Samantha. So congratulations on matching it. It sounds like a site you really want to be at, which is exciting.
Yes, I'm going to the Center for Multicultural Training and Psychology in Boston.
Okay.
Nice.
That is exciting. When I matched, I cried. I think so I was on the East Coast and I was with family because I was doing like a research internship. So I was with family, and one of my closest friends in my program, she had called me because she got her email. She's like, did you find out? I'm like, refreshing. I was like, I don't have an email. So while I'm on the phone with her, the email came through. So I was like, let me check it. And it's just like Samantha says, it's this moment. It's like a moment of relief. It's not that your journey is over, but the fact that you have matched, a large part of it is over. Like it's like this relief, like, okay, like this is really happening, which I think is different, even for dissertation defense. Like I was emotional for that, but at that point I'm like, it's not that I'm not going to graduate. Like it's like one of those things. It's like, I mean, it was exciting, but it's like, I was just glad dissertation was over. This is like really a milestone of like, it's real. I'm graduating. This is happening.
Right.
And so I was like super emotional. Like I cried. My family is like super involved. So my mom had made like this poster of like, where is Jess gonna go with like all these sites I'd applied. Like she had been there. So they were like super excited. We went to breakfast. We celebrated. And I encourage people to celebrate the moment. I know that I think instinct is as soon as we find out where we're going to start planning. Where am I going to live? When do I have to be there? Like we go into planning mode. Celebrate. It took a really long time to get here. It took a whole lot of hard work to get to this point. I promise you, like, the place you want to live will still be there in a week. Like, it won't. But I think it is really important to celebrate the moment, to be present in the moment, to give yourself a break, a week off of, like, nothing outside of what I have to do for class or something. So you can just, like, okay, like, recalibrate. Because I think that we're just trained from grad school to go right into the next thing.
Right.
So it's okay to celebrate. Yeah, celebrate yourself. You did a thing. It's a good thing. Celebrate it. And so I think it's a really emotional thing. And I think having a lot of support is helpful. So my friend and I were both on the phone like, we matched. Yeah.
I think Dr. Jackson, you mentioned something that's very important to kind of like stop and kind of like celebrate these milestones, because I know for me, like, I feel like I'm always on go, go, go. So after passing comps, I was just kind of like, cool, what's the next milestone? Then it was dissertation defense. What's the next milestone, right? And really not stopping to really appreciate and really celebrate, just kind of like savoring in that moment. Because like, as I'm reflecting back on it, like it was a really big accomplishment, right? Like I was, oh my goodness, like I matched, like also all this hard work I've been putting in, like the different practicum sites I've had, the schoolwork, this was for me to ensure that I was successful at getting a site. And so like, it's very important that I really take that in and really do celebrate that this is an accomplishment that, you know, not many go through. And then like, as a Black woman, like there's only, I think the last numbers I saw was like less than 5% of all licensed psychologists are Black. And so just kind of like understanding like this is a really big milestone. And so just kind of like stopping and really celebrating, kind of like really being proud of my accomplishment. Just the fact that, hey, this is not something that a lot of us get to experience. So really taking that in and stopping and stuff to stop and smell the roses.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Well, go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
I was going to say one pro tip that I forgot to mention for interviews. I promise you, someone gave me this tip, the best thing of my life. When you start getting interviews, you can go on Amazon and you can buy like a handheld steamer, and it's $25. And that is your best friend, because your stuff is going to be so wrinkled from how much travel you have in your suitcase that trying to get to a hotel and trying to get the hotel iron and all of that stuff to work that you don't know how old it is. Literally, the steamer is really small, packs in your bag. That way, it doesn't matter how you pack stuff. You can ball it up, roll it up, whatever, and steam it out when you get there. Right. Saved my life, because you go on so many interviews, you forget, like, your stuff is going to get so wrinkled. And being aware of 24-hour dry cleaners, so that if you are, like for me, I was gone for almost a week and a half, and I'm like, I need to stick this in after an interview and then pick it up tomorrow on my way out. That kind of stuff is super helpful, because it actually takes out so much stress. Like, because you are aware of what you're wearing, how you're presenting. Accidents happen. Maybe you were on an interview, somebody bumped you and you spilled something, and now you're like, what am I going to do? Like, I didn't I've used all my shirts. I've been traveling for a week. I don't have any shirts left. But those two things are absolutely like super helpful so that you can just relax on, focus on the interview and not how you're looking.
I would also encourage to just do a carry-on. Like typically when I travel, I love checking bags in because I don't want to have I just want to check all my bags in. Right. But for this process, I did all carry-ons. And I only had one bag and plus my purse because I wanted to travel as light as possible if you can. Just because there are literally times where my flight was delayed. I literally had 2 hours to get from the airport to my interview site, especially if I had flew in the morning of. And so like having a carry-on and not having to worry about going to baggage claim to go through all that hassle was a lifesaver for me. So if you can, please, please, please consider just doing carry-ons so that way if anything happens with your flight, you're covered.
That's a good tip. That's a good tip. Well, as we're closing up, I was wondering if there's anything I haven't asked that you think is very important to discuss or any final lasting remarks you would like to leave.
I think I just want to emphasize to everybody that is applying to internship, you are enough. I think internship can create a lot of doubt. We didn't get interviews at sites we wanted. We didn't get, we get around other people and we're like, oh, they're doing a lot of all this other stuff. What am I doing? To remind people that you are enough, the work that you're doing matters. And as you go through this process, it is a lot of growing, a lot of I think coming out of it, most people will say they feel more confident because you get to a point, you're essentially selling the work that you're doing when you go on interviews. And because of that, you also get a chance to see what else is out there. And I think we get insulated into our programs. And so when we see what else is out there and how people are seeing us, it gives a confidence boost. And so I just encourage people to try to embrace all of that on internship. And to the degree you can reduce some of that self-doubt. You did the work. You are enough. You belong here. You are going to help to field the psychology. And it may not be the vision that you thought, and that's okay. Because there were sites that I went on interviews with that I, in my mind, was already planning to rank high, and then won the interview, and I was like, oh, absolutely not. I don't want to be that. And so then it would make me nervous, I put a lot into this site, and not maybe I didn't look into the other sites. And so just going into it with an open mind, knowing that you're going to grow, but just remembering you are enough, whether they're able to see it or not able to see it, knowing, being grounded in who you are.
Right.
I totally agree. One thing I would add on to that is to be yourself, right? Dr. Jackson spoke about being enough, and also you've made it this far. So you are very much competent. You're able to do the work. So, you are definitely enough. But also ensure that you are being your authentic self. I feel like for me, and that's something that I had to learn, like Dr. Jackson mentioned, I grew from the internship process, right? So I think that early on, somewhere at one of my interviews, someone said something that really struck with me. And then I just felt oh my goodness, I'm here to ensure that I get a site, but I also have to like them as well. So if I'm not presenting my authentic self to them, they're not getting to know Samantha. They're getting to know a version of Samantha that I've created because I think that's what they want to see, right? And so something I had to learn from me, and it was a process, just kind of being my authentic self. If there's something about me they don't like, that's okay. I still have to be myself, because if I secure a site based on this version of myself that I'm not, then when I show up, I'm kind of they're not even going to meet Samantha. They're going to meet this version that I created. So for me, it was very important that I was my authentic self to ensure that this site does meet my needs and that I fit them as well. And I feel the only way I was able to do that, the only way I was able to really secure a site that I truly feel meets my needs and really fits me, is that I had to be my authentic self, so that way they can see that, just to ensure that, we were both a good match for each other. So the only thing I would add is you're enough, just be your authentic self, whatever that may be.
Thank you both for joining us today. I'd like to extend huge thanks, because I know it's early morning where you guys are. So thank you again. And like I said throughout, I've definitely learned a lot from our conversation, and I know that the people out in virtual world will too. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.